Hi, welcome to Bottom Line with Bob and Kendel Ehrlich. Please follow us at Earl Bottom Line, at Bob_Ehrlich, and at Kendel Ehrlich. Here we are, episode number 9.
The casual look.
That's right.
What do you
We
think,
got our striped shirts on today.
You look
casual, but we got a lot to talk about.
We have a lot
And
to talk about.
As usual, all important, but
Well, beyond what people think, and we're talking about one of our favorite subjects, high school / youth / athletics.
there's a theme, as you notice. It's been politics and athletics.
Well, it really struck
Since
me
we've
this
started,
week.
in a lot of ways, and sometimes they intersect as they have under COVID.
What struck me this week as we returned again to watch a mini season, our high school quarterbacks playing 4 games, our college safeties playing 5 games, but it struck me as I sat there at Friday Night Lights with hardly any crowd, only parents at our quarterbacks game. But watching both teams prepare, just watching the coaches' interaction, the parents on both sides, both teams, it reminded me of how good this is, how important it is, way beyond the sport itself. We love football. We're a football family. We know that. This is way beyond football. This was what we know our kid, but not just our kid, every kid who participates in, whether it's football, whether it's band.
Well, the band. The
Yeah.
band hasn't been there, but the cheerleaders have been.
Cheerleaders were there. So many kids looking forward to this activity they love. They love it for lots of reasons. They like to show off their talent, but most of all, I think they like to be with their peers. They like to be back in school. They like to be, again, at Friday Night Lights. This is a part of their life, their high school careers that they've been deprived of for the last year. And just to see the joy, joy is the word that really came into my mind.
Joy from everyone.
Yeah.
Teachers watching, parents there.
The athletic director,
editors, right,
the principal.
coaches, the principal, everyone was so excited. And I think it is a positive thing that our high school cultures matter and that
Yeah.
the kids actually really love all of the culture that our high schools bring and that our culture does that right. And I think there's an affirmation because there's a lot of criticism about our education system,
Yep.
rightfully so,
Yep.
on many levels.
Yeah.
However, COVID has really brought out that the way that we socialize and the activities that Americans have come to know, American children in high schools, benchmarks that
Yeah.
they like to reach from freshman year to senior year, including proms and all kinds of activities that kids look forward to and really enjoy being part of.
It's a rite of passage.
Right.
It's a rite of passage. They've been deprived of it. And I don't want to go crazy here. We love sports and all that. And sometimes in our culture, a sports crazy culture, we go even beyond the pale with regard to sports. But again, I don't know what the racial breakdown of Josh's team is. I don't know. It's pretty even, maybe.
Maybe
Yeah,
half and half.
maybe half and half,
Yeah.
60-40, white, black. But again, sport. One of the reasons we love sport is it's so merit-based.
Right.
These kids, they couldn't give a lick about race and what's happening in our country and politicians trying to tear the country apart and right and left and black and white. We're trying to beat the other team. We're working together. Couldn't give a lick about the income of your parents, what your parents look like, what you look like. You are my teammate. That is the greatness of sport. That's why one of the reasons I think people love sport, and one of the reasons why so many people are turned off by recently
Right.
the woke nature of professional sports.
I agree. I think maybe that's part of why everybody was so joyful the other night. We were all thinking about one thing,
Yeah.
football and winning the game.
Yeah.
And watching kids, not only our own child, but kids that we've seen grow up from Sandlot.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of camaraderie with the parents. There's a lot of people that know each other. And I think that it's, maybe that was part of it. Taking it away from all of what you see about politics. And you're right, You know, last one was MLB,
Yep.
the getting involved in politics.
Yep.
And we'll see the impact of that. And I think people are really tired of that.
Nobody's moving a high school football game from one county to another because of a voting law. They're just there to watch and enjoy their kids. And again, take in the environment, but again, it's about merit, it's about sport, it's about love of sports, it's about love of competition, it's about high school, all this good stuff. I just came back the other night. We won. Probably wouldn't have been as happy if we had lost.
Yay.
But you know what? The other team had some great talent. It was just fun to watch kids do what they want to do without
Right.
adults trying to separate them and us. So again, maybe
Or
enough of that.
label or define
Ugh,
or whatever it might be.
Enough. We've had it.
So we hope that
NFL,
continues. and
NBA,
we want,
MLB.
please, school districts around the country, please keep the high school sports, keep the sports going for these kids throughout the school year of 2021 to 2022.
And keep the arts going, keep the plays going, keep the band going, keep the cheerleaders going, keep everything going. Boys and girls sports alike.
Even if school's still partly virtual.
Exactly. We were doing one of our favorite things in the evening, watching Tucker last week, and he had an interest in Tucker Carlson, obviously very popular show on Fox. He had a little small report concerning giving histories, giving contributions as far as political dollars go this past cycle. And we found it interesting because the new contribution numbers and the identities of the contributors reflect sort of the change that we've discussed with regard to the parties, the national parties, the change of identities, the realignments, if you will, concerning our political parties. I didn't get into this in great detail, but from the report, college professors, bankers, finance types, Wall Street types, heavily for Joe Biden. 10, 15, 20 years ago when I was in Congress, when we first went to Congress in the 104th Congress, 1994, just the opposite, obviously. The Republicans were the party of Wall Street, of big business, generally, of the Chamber of Commerce. Today,
And
this past cycle...
Why did that change?
Well, we'll get into
for
that.
business?
We'll get into that.
Okay.
But think about this. The billionaire casino magnate took the majority of mechanics, custodians, small business, but custodians. Small business people. Again, talk about a rapid change with regard to realignment in our country, not just with these numbers from contributors, but also the issue agendas of both parties reflected here. So we've had this monumental 180-degree change from sort of the caricatures of both political parties, from the New Deal. The New Deal caricatures lasted many decades. FDR, the New Deal, the working class.
Kitchen
right?
table.
Kitchen table, Democrats, machine Democrats, urban Democrats, right?
Now those people
Are
Republicans.
suburban Republicans. Yeah. And big business, Wall Street, big tech, clearly Democrat oriented and quite liberal, and including big business these days. This woke thing going on with business is really interesting. So you see it in the voting breakdowns, you see it in the financial breakdowns. We're on record, I'm on record, we're both on record with regard to how we see this going forward. This is a good thing for the Republican Party. Many of us have been toiling in this party for decades, the Ehrlichs included, trying to make it more of a blue-collar, working-class, middle-class party. We always thought it should be, given the values that we think the party had and should have going into the future. How ironic that it took Donald Trump, despite all the
billionaire.
demonization. Yeah,
Right, a billionaire to do that, to
billionaire.
identify and to bring people along to policies that protected America.
yeah. And going back to your question, China, obviously, big deal. China, drawing a line with regard to China, drawing a line with regard to China stealing our intellectual property, drawing a line with regard to trade deals getting tough on China. Wall Street, big business, didn't like it. They gave most of their money to Joe Biden as a result. And I think that's sort of the dividing line, quite frankly.
But why are the corporations getting into such extreme wokeness with censorship and all of these other things? Is it because, are these the children of the 60s who are elite and are saying, we know better for you. We're going to decide what's good for you and what's not good for you. And because we got power, we're doing it.
You're not supposed to ask me questions I don't know the answer to on this show. You know that. And you just violated the rule. Because we need to devote a show to this. Because I've been racking my brain.
Well, maybe we need
Thinking
some
about
guests
this.
thinking, a couple of guests to talk about.
Because it's clear. It's very clear with regard now, the latest installment here being the Georgia voting regime and the reaction of at least some large businesses in our country, the CEOs. So there's something going on here, whether it's overreaction to activist investors, whether it's generational, whether it's fear of boycotts by the left. I don't know, but it's maybe a combination thereof. But we're going to figure this out. We're going to devote a show to this, in fact, in the future. But the bottom line is it's certainly happening. You, being my wife, love me, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Was I fast enough on
On the
that?
record, thank you. And I do think that you are a
course.
little prejudiced when it comes to my writing,
I am,
and I appreciate that.
because you're such a great writer and I'm not, but at any
No,
rate.
that's not the case, but you really liked my last Western Journal piece. And again, to remind our viewers, my pieces generally appear once a week in Western Journal. It's a terrific publication. A lot of good writers. Governor Huckabee, obviously, is a regular contributor as well. A lot of really fine conservative minds. But you liked this last piece, and the piece concerned the unicorn voter, as I phrased it. I probably didn't come up with that originally, but I thought it was appropriate. By the unicorn voter from last election, I do not mean rhinos. I do not mean Republicans who are really Democrats. I do not mean moderate Democrats who tend to cross over from time to time. I'm talking about legitimate, pro-business, pro-family values, whatever social conservative term you want to use, lifelong Republican voting pattern, conservative, free market person who voted for Joe Biden. Now, I know that sounds crazy when you think about it in that context, but it clearly happened, and I could argue in some very close states, those voters made the difference. And the reason, and I talk about this in the piece, we had these conversations, some folks used to work for us,
Right.
for some neighbors, people we know, relatives, and you had the same conversations, I'm sure, those of you who supported Trump, but we're talking to Republicans who were not supporting the president. They just couldn't put up with the president's
Because
language,
they didn't like his personality.
his personality,
They didn't like his personality,
his
so they
ego.
couldn't vote for him.
Right.
Meanwhile, now we have Biden.
Well, hold on a second now. So what got back to us and what became clear, particularly from the polls taken after the election, was there was a small percentage, but a very significant percentage, significant in this sense of what, 5-10% of Republicans, conservatives, who did not vote for the president because they could not put up with his personality, his cockiness, his salesmanship, sometimes the Twitter stuff.
These people wanted love to win.
Yes, they did.
Love won.
Well, love did
Yeah.
not win. Progressivism won. And that's,
Just look at the southern border to see if love won.
that's the point of my article, and that's sort of the reason I wrote this particular piece at this time. Because now we're starting to pick up,
Buyer's
a couple
remorse.
months later, a bit of buyer's remorse, which does nothing for my blood pressure because we had these same conversations 60, 80, 90 days ago. But when someone comes up to me, as they've begun to occur recently, and say, geez, I didn't know that President Biden would be this far left. I didn't know he'd be this far progressive. I thought it was the old Joe Biden, the old Delaware Joe Biden, the old sort of Chamber of Commerce Joe
Amtrak
Biden,
Joe.
Amtrak Joe, yeah. Sort of the traditional Northeastern liberal Joe, not this progressive Joe, not this very progressive administration. And they'll express surprise to me, and there's a little bit of buyer's remorse. And so I wrote this particular paragraph that you liked, and we're not going to read it verbatim, but I hear complaints about the Pentagon more interested in progressive gender doctrine than military preparedness, right?
Right.
Energy policy that shutters pipelines and gas fields while repudiating the notion of American energy independence. Immigration policy that simply nullified Mr. Trump's successful handling of the border. We forget, midterm, President Trump had these same problems, the caravans,
Right.
right? and he acted, and particularly got some cooperation from the government of Mexico,
Mexico,
right? The
right.
Stay in Mexico policy.
Plus the wall got built.
Plus, more wall got built. Exactly. Security state that requires photo identification for everything you do in the United States of America, except,
For voting, but that's starting to change, state by state.
we hope so.
Come on, bring it on.
A gun-grabbing leadership that always seems surrounded by people who have people with guns.
Protect them. Right.
With guns. Teachers' unions are more interested in defunding the police and teaching our kids.
Well, gun control is always against the law-abiding citizens, because guess what? The criminals don't register their
What did you
guns.
start out as, by the way, professionally?
A public defender, and I changed on that issue because of my clients.
I gotcha. Progressives who bemoan violence against Asian Americans but remain silent when college admission officers discriminate against the same group. How about that? How about that? How convenient. And a media that daily engages the race card but hardly acknowledges the carnage inflicted on African American kids in some of our largest cities. Look at Chicago. Look at the numbers produced in Chicago every week, and nobody talks about it. Nobody writes about it.
In
There's
Baltimore,
no
by the
analysis of
way.
it. Yeah,
A
Baltimore
place
as
near and
well.
dear to us, right.
So again, we hear these complaints about what's going on from the same people who really should have voted in a philosophical sense for President Trump. They did not. There's a bit of buyer's remorse. It'll be interesting to revisit these same folks in another 3 months, and maybe this time next year as well, as the midterm elections loom. Last issue for this week is the president's reemergence, President Trump's reemergence a bit. He took a shot at Mitch McConnell. He took a shot, I can't repeat it on the air what he said, but it wasn't nice. Obviously, that relationship that was pretty healthy was
For a
pretty
long
healthy for a
time.
long time.
I think until the end.
Until the end, obviously, particularly with regard to judgeships, one of the real success stories of the Trump administration, a couple hundred
And
new.
McConnell was very much a part of that.
Very much. He led it. I mean,
He
without
led-
him,
he led
it
that.
doesn't happen. Also, some reports reflected a sign, or the first sign really, that maybe, just maybe, President Trump may call upon a successor, may not run, in fact, in 2024. And what do you think about that, Mrs. Ehrlich? What do you think about that? What that proposition?
Oh, it's way too early to think about all that, actually. I do. I think it's way too early.
Well, the party's
me,
split.
I don't like to.
The party's split already. The Trump
Let me just
lovers
tell you
want
that
Trump, period.
the Trump agenda is going to continue.
That's the
whether
right answer.
Trump is the candidate or not. That agenda is successful, and 74 million people want that agenda, and it's probably even more. It'll be more after we live through the Biden administration.
Going back to our earlier discussion, you do not get progress with African American voters. You do not get major progress with Hispanic voters without the Trump agenda this past cycle, right? These folks were reacting to an agenda, to positive messages from the Trump administration, not just positive messages, by the way, but positive policy successes. And
Measurable.
measurable, and they campaigned on those successes, and as a result, saw some improvement. I think it's fair to say that there are a lot of folks who like the president who want him to run. No doubt about it. They just want the president to run again, to make things right. I think there's obviously some folks in the party who are uncomfortable with him, do not want him to run. There's probably an equal, maybe an emerging majority that, like us, like what he did an awful lot, are not sure we wish him to run next time, but we clearly want that agenda on the front burner. We want that agenda reflecting the Republican Party going forward.
Well, I think it would be great if he ran, but I also understand that going through what he went through, I would really understand that he might not want to do that again and put his family through that again.
Yeah,
It could be someone else that he'd prefer to do that battle and to support the agenda that he put forth so brilliantly, in my view, and very effectively, and it is really going to show after we see what happens with Biden.
By the way, we also saw a report this past week that said the president lost over $1 billion of personal wealth. And he never took a salary, something he never got any credit for, nobody talked about. A lot of
I
folks
gave
in
him
the
a lot of
media.
credit for
Well,
that.
yeah, so do we, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's fair to say that the impact, the imprint, if you will, on this party remains a function of the Trump administration's successes. We're not going to go back to the old way. We're not going to go back to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce looking the other way on China, America second, American middle of the pack stuff. The America first stuff, the American exceptionalism stuff, the manufacturing rebirth, everything, the cheap energy, American energy, energy independence, all that great stuff that not only the president campaigned on, but he achieved, has to be the framework for the party going forward. Again, we'll see what he wants to do, but Republicans need to have their act together come 2022, clearly, with regard to the House. There's some very tough Senate races, a 50-50 Senate right now, which obviously is controlled by the Democrats. So the Senate's going to be a tough terrain going forward. The House, there's a lot of folks in Washington who think Republicans have a good chance to recapture the House. We shall see. But the fact of it is that agenda needs to remain front and center if the Republican Party wants to grow.
We'll also have to look at governor races, and I think that we could see a big changeover with that as well, because I think people are really going to be paying attention.
And we'll conclude on this. We've talked in the past about what did not occur prior to the election, which was state Republican parties not having their act together when new regimes were put together as a function of the pandemic that did not comport with state law, state election law. Mm-hmm. So again, state attorney general races, control of state chambers, particularly in marginal states, really important. People don't talk about this. Controlling both houses of the Pennsylvania legislature, electing a governor in Pennsylvania, for example, hugely important. So not just directly with regard to Pennsylvania in the coming years or any other, Michigan or Wisconsin, but also with regard to the next presidential election, having Republicans in control makes a big difference.
I think it could be a landslide. We'll see.
We'll see.
Midterms will show, and
Yeah.
we'll have a lot to talk about between now and then.
We always do.
Yeah, so thanks for joining us here at Bottom Line with Bob and Kendel Ehrlich. Again, contact us at Earl Bottom Line, at Bob_Ehrlich, and at Kendel Ehrlich. Thanks a lot.
Godspeed.